I'm back again talking about David Reeves, and that's because, quite frankly, he's easy pickings. But his videos on YouTube are always short, so we're going to do a few of them in this video so that this video isn't way too short. The first one is actually a trailer for a DVD. Now, I don't feel like buying his DVD, but let's just review some of the things they're saying.
What did Charles Darwin imply when it comes to race?
I wish he talked more about this in his trailer, but he doesn't. But any time that Charles Darwin said race, at least in his work that I am aware of, he talks about different classification of organisms, not like black people, white people, and Asian people. That's not what that term meant in the context and time that Darwin wrote.
What does the Bible say? And does modern scientific research in genetics back it up?
No, science doesn't back up what the Bible says about genetics. It doesn't back up the idea that 2 of every unclean species are all that's needed for the species to be able to survive. It doesn't back up the idea that the entire world could be populated via incest twice. And it doesn't back up the idea that you can change the genetic traits of cattle based on what cattle they were facing when they mated. That's not in science, but it is in the Bible.
But according to the evolutionary paradigm, if this is true, then people evolved from the ape-like ancestor in the past, and some people would be more evolved than others.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So the implications there are pretty dangerous because it puts some people groups over others.
It does.
You're confusing Darwin's actual work with social Darwinism, and they're 2 completely different things. Yes, Darwinian evolution does say that organisms can be more fit than others. But that's it. It just says that some animals are better fit to survive in their environments than others, and those organisms are more likely to survive. According to actual Darwinian thought, if some people are indeed more evolved than others, that just means that they are further removed from their common ancestor of another. That doesn't mean that they are superior or better in any way. It just means that they survive in their environment in a different way. For skin tones, that just means that they are further away from the equator, because the closer you are to the equator, the darker your skin should be, because your skin is absorbing a lot of sunlight. But if you live further away from the equator, then you're not absorbing as much sunlight, because not as much sunlight hits those areas, so it's better to have lighter skin. So if, in that sense, lighter-skinned Europeans did evolve more than darker-skinned Africans, that just means that they are in different environments. It doesn't mean that they're any better. It just means that the way that they survive is different, because they have different conditions. No way does it say that any particular race is superior.
It really does. And that's actually what Darwin drew from his conclusion. What evolution did was give people so-called scientific justification for their racism.
No, it doesn't. What you're talking about is social Darwinism, which was not actually advocated or purported or even proposed by Darwin. It's just a philosophy as opposed to actual science. And granted, it is a philosophy that was based on the idea of actual Darwinian evolution, but it is not scientific in any real way.
The Bible's clear that we all come from one man and one woman.
Mm-hmm. Yes, of course, we come from one man and one woman. So every single human in the world came from incest, twice, including Noah and the flood. And of course, this is completely in line with the modern idea of genetic variation, I'm sure.
That means there's only one race, the human race, right?
But you're forgetting that the Bible actually is pretty discriminatory against anybody who is not a Jew. That is until after the Gospels, when they try to change the story. But God clearly favored the Jews above everybody else, and he states that blatantly. And even Jesus was racist against a Gentile woman. Remember when he said that it is not meet to take the children's bread and cast it to dogs? Or something along those lines? That was racist. So according to God, until the epistles changed the story, we are all one of two races, Jew or Gentile. And God favors the Jews for no good reason other than that they were a small group, I guess.
And this also means that since we're all descendants of Adam and Eve, we're all sinners by nature and by choice.
Wait, hold on. By nature and by choice. So did we choose to naturally be born with sin? Or did we all naturally choose to be born with sin? Because according to biblical thought, we are all sinners. None of us are righteous. But if that's the case, then we're not sinners by choice. We're sinners by our own nature that we cannot overcome, as the Bible says that we can't. So that's not our choice. That's, quite frankly, the way God made us. And that's pretty much the end of the video. It was short, right? So let's go on to the next one about natural selection.
Why should you believe in creation and not evolution? I mean, scientifically speaking. Haven't we proven that evolution is a fact?
So this is part of a seemingly long-running series of his called Why You Should Believe in Creation, ... and not evolution. And he starts off saying these exact same words every single video. Now, this isn't something spectacular, isn't something incredibly noteworthy, but I wanted to include it in this video. See, he keeps saying it and keeps saying it in every video, just hammering it in. And it gets really annoying and, quite frankly, patronizing.
Survival of the fittest to reproduce, or natural selection, is considered to be the driving force behind evolution. It seems pretty simple. The sickly gazelle will get eaten while the healthy gazelle gets away. The healthy gazelle lives to reproduce, so the next generation gets the genes of the healthy gazelle. Now, theoretically, over time, the gazelle species gets stronger as the weaker, sicker ones are weeded out over the generations.
Okay, so he gave us a basic rundown of natural selection, and it's pretty okay. He got it right. So what can be wrong? Let's keep going.
Is survival of the fittest behind the supposed process of molecules to man evolution? Well, evolution requires the addition of massive amounts of brand new genetic information. After all, you can't get from an amoeba to an astronaut without adding instructions into the DNA for brand new features like arms, a complex brain, and an advanced circulatory system.
Okay, I agree. In order to get the organisms that we have now from the simple organisms of the past, we need the addition of genetic material and genetic information, as they would rather say. And once we have this genetic information, then natural selection selects between the beneficial ones. Right? That's what you're going to say. Right? That's how you understand natural selection. Right?
So, does survival of the fittest produce this information? No, it doesn't. Survival of the fittest acts on information that was already there in the creature's genome. It doesn't create any new information. It simply eliminates already existing information.
Yeah, you're right. You're correct. But nobody's saying that it does. Nobody's saying that that's how it works. Except, of course, creationists who don't understand Darwinian evolution. Natural selection selects between traits. Evolution is what produces those traits. So you're trying to take natural selection and say, hey, it doesn't do what evolution does. Of course it doesn't. It's just one half of evolution by natural selection. It seems like you have the pieces of the puzzle, but just can't put them together because you don't like the puzzle. Okay, here he just gives an example of natural selection in place with bunnies in the Arctic. But after that, he says,
in this example, did evolution just occur? After all, the rabbits changed from brown and white to just white.
No, of course not. Evolution did not happen because nothing changed. But Darwinian evolution, or evolution by natural selection, did happen. What you're talking about is the natural selection side of the story. evolution came before that in order to give the rabbits those traits. I mean, really, this isn't difficult to understand, but creationists are going to say that evolution is ridiculous because of this, because it doesn't do what it doesn't say that it does.
But Darwinian evolution didn't happen. You see, no new genetic information was added to the rabbit's DNA. They already had the information for white fur. It just took environmental pressure from the foxes for the brown fur genes to be eliminated. The rabbits stayed rabbits, and they didn't gain anything new that they didn't already have.
Except Darwinian evolution did happen. Darwinian evolution is evolution by natural selection. You gave an example of natural selection, which is part of Darwinian evolution. Now, actual evolution is what gave that rabbit white fur. It didn't just have it to begin with magically. It got that color somewhere along the line. I mean, you aren't going to find fossils of rabbits that are 100 million years old, because rabbits weren't around then. Rabbit fossils start at around 53 million years ago. There aren't any older than that. So yes, rabbits did evolve. Yes, there is evidence for it. Maybe we can't exactly trace when rabbits became one color, but they did certainly evolve. You can't just say there's natural selection, but there's no evolution, because natural selection is just natural selection. That's essentially what you're saying, and it's ridiculous. Anybody who has a basic understanding of these concepts can see right through it. Of course, the rabbits stayed rabbits, even when they evolved their white color. One trait isn't going to change a rabbit into something else. Not any one instance of evolution is going to change a kind of animal into another. It happens slowly over an immense period of time, which I guess is something that you just can't understand.
Survival of the fittest is considered the driving force behind evolution, and yet it can't add new information into the genome. Something evolution has to do if it wants to go anywhere.
And that's the crux of this issue. He doesn't even understand what he's saying. Yes, in some ways, natural selection is the driving force behind evolution. But that doesn't mean that natural selection is the underlying cause of everything that happens in evolution. Natural selection doesn't do what mutation does. Natural selection gives those mutations direction. Natural selection selects beneficial traits. So if organisms change by the process of evolution, which is caused by mutations, then the organisms that survive more are the ones that are better fit to survive. And that's what they mean when they say that natural selection is the driving force behind evolution. Not that it does everything to cause evolution, but that natural selection determines how organisms will survive.
Survival of the fittest doesn't drive evolution. It's simply an observable natural process that works on the information that's already there.
Okay, sure. Natural selection only works on genetic information that is already there. But that doesn't mean that genetic information is never added. We do know that genetic information is indeed added. Insertion mutations, and more significantly, gene duplication mutations, add genetic material. And over time, through different mutations, those new genetic materials can change to take on a different role, to produce a new trait. We have observed this happening. This is happening. Nobody's saying that that's what natural selection does. Only you are.
Actually, there's no known process that can produce brand new genetic information. And if you can't get new information, you can't evolve.
Okay, but genetic information can be added, and we've observed it.
No known process, 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 no known process.
So we can evolve.
Just one more scientific reason that you shouldn't believe in molecules to man evolution. It takes a lot of faith.
No, it doesn't take faith. It just takes, research, observation, actual studying, or picking up a science textbook, which maybe you haven't done before. I wouldn't be surprised. But it doesn't take faith. Alright, so let's do one more video. This time about mutations.
Why should you believe in creation and not evolution? I mean, scientifically speaking. Haven't we proven that evolution is a fact? You see, we do record mutations all the time. A cow with an extra leg or a three-headed frog. But is this actually useful? Do these creatures benefit from the mutation? That's not typically the case. In fact, one might say that it creates an evolutionary disadvantage in most cases.
Yes, typically. I agree with you. Mutations are, more often than not, harmful, but they can be beneficial. See, a lot of this has to do with the fact that modern organisms are already pretty fit to survive in their environments. So there are few changes that can be made that are beneficial, and most possible changes are detrimental. So since evolution is random, since mutations are random, then yeah, the majority of mutations are going to be harmful. But that doesn't mean that it's impossible, and it doesn't mean that it didn't happen in the past.
But you're saying, David, you're only talking about the really ugly ones, or the huge changes. What about the tiny changes in DNA over time? Well, I'm glad you brought that up. Maybe those could account for the slow beneficial change that Darwinian evolution needs. So let's take a look. My favorite might be Berkeley's top example from the Understanding Evolution section of their website. The top example of mutations that they give is sickle cell anemia, an example of a tiny change in the DNA. This single substitution in the DNA coding results in a potentially deadly disease. Okay, so we need something positive to make evolution work.
Okay, wow. Mutations can happen slowly over time to produce different kinds of animals. Oh, well, this one small mutation is harmful. Therefore, all small mutations are harmful. Therefore, no mutations are beneficial. What about how our teeth changed slowly over time to become omnivorous? We have documentation of that. Are you going to talk about that?
I'm thinking that if a fish suddenly sprouts a couple of legs, then we're in business. Or are we? The fish doesn't need the legs, and it would probably make it harder to swim, resulting in a predator fish snatching him up.
Alright, sure, but that's not how it happens. Genetic mutations don't make completely functioning, complex systems like that just appear within 1 or 2, 3 or 4 generations. But here's how fish actually did start walking around. See, shallow water fish started pushing themselves around the bottom using their limbs. And when they began to do that, the fish with stronger limbs were better able to do that and were naturally selected. So naturally, fish limbs became stronger and stronger until eventually they could push themselves out and walk around above water, kind of like mud skippers. From there, the addition of more material at the end of the limbs could be beneficial, and separation of those into digits could also be beneficial. And the formation of bones, and those bones getting stronger and stronger over time, and muscles being more and more pronounced, yeah, it could happen slowly over time. Nobody's saying that it happened overnight, except, of course, creationists say that that's what we're saying. They like to say what we're saying a lot when it's not actually true.
But that would be even more complicated because if he did decide to make it on land, he'd need to quickly develop a whole array of new breathing mechanisms to survive long enough to enjoy his new mutated legs. You see, he's not going to make it very long in the water or on land.
But what if the respiratory system evolved slowly alongside the evolution of the limbs? Also slowly. So as the limbs became better and better, the fish became more and more amphibious, and the respiratory changed along with that. I mean, we have organisms that are in these various stages today. Maybe they don't trace an exact lineage, but there are animals that are fully aquatic in deep water. There are animals that are aquatic in shallow water. There are semi-aquatic animals. There are amphibious animals. We have the different stages. So what's to say that organisms can't slowly change between those stages?
If we observe a major mutation in nature, more often than not, it's harmful, or at the very least unhelpful.
And that's because the organisms today got to a point where they are pretty fit to survive in their environments. So there's only a small amount of changes that could be made that are beneficial. So of course, random mutations, more often than not, are going to be harmful.
When we observe a simple shift in the DNA code, or a missing segment, or the random addition of a string, it many times alters the genetic code into something unreadable.
Okay, sure, but that's not all of the possible mutations, by far. Sure, when you look at it in a physical perspective, it doesn't necessarily take a lot to make big changes. But not all changes that are made are big. Some mutations only change the DNA by one nucleotide, whether that's substituting the nucleotide, adding one, or deleting one. It's just one nucleotide, and most of the time, it doesn't make a big difference, if it makes a difference in the phenotype at all.
Mutations are unpredictable at best and typically not beneficial. We're finding that evolution could never use random mutations to produce the diversity of life that we see, even given millions of years.
Okay, but what about 4 billion years? Yes, random mutations can produce more beneficial and more complex organisms over time, and that's by the process of natural selection. Mutations can be beneficial, even if small, and natural selection selects those beneficial mutations. So organisms, over time, would be more and more beneficial, more and more fit to survive, more and more evolved. I'm really starting to think of this as part of a puzzle that creationists just won't put together. They're refusing to fit them together. They're refusing some pieces entirely because they can't understand it themselves, or at least can't actually look it up from an actually scientific point of view.
So maybe mutations are not a good argument for Darwinian evolution.
It's not an argument for Darwinian evolution. It's a part of evolution. See, we don't have Darwinian evolution and then justify it with these things. That's what you do. You have religion and then you find things to justify it. We found phenomena and then we made conclusions based on that. And one of the conclusions that we made by observing the world around us is Darwinian evolution. There's tons of evidence for it, and you just hate all of it.
But what about natural selection? I'll save that for another time. But you'll see that even that stacks up better from a design perspective.
I did it out of order. God's damn it. And I've started saying God's damn it, because if somebody's like, oh, you said God, you believe in God, now it's just a lose-lose situation for them.
Just one more scientific reason that you shouldn't believe in molecules to man evolution. It takes a lot of faith.
No. The reason that you shouldn't believe evolution is because you have to think about it. You have to research. You have to trust scientists who have been doing this for decades. That's why you don't believe in it. Because it doesn't go against your book that you say is true because you were told from a young age. And that's the difference between us. You learned your religion and you learned that it was really important and that you should never doubt it. But science was learned not because it was just taught by somebody arbitrarily, but because we observed the world around us. But when you have religion pounded into your head and the natural world doesn't match up with what you've been taught, then you hate what's been found. But that's the end of that last video, and this is the end of my video. Look at it. It's a beautiful ending. Look at how well this is ending.